we got quite a case in our hands with regard to a lot of people getting fined. So when I speak to that, I'm talking about people that are coming in on planes to our airports that I've just said, you know what, I'm not even going to bother going to do a 14-day quarantine. Just give me that fine. People come across our borders. I'm not going to quarantine. Just give me that fine. And so there's going to be an extreme amount of backlog with regard to what the courts are going to face here, because people are, quite frankly, are not going to pay it. So I'm wondering, could you comment on really where is this going to go? Are the courts just going to throw these cases out? I know you were speaking a lot about drinking and driving cases, and I respect that, but I'd like to go down a different path, because truthfully, I believe the court system is going to be stretched to stretched to the limits. And I'm just curious if you could comment on what does this look like? What does it look like going forward? I believe you had mentioned the courts are looking into March of next year. Potentially, we could talk about March of 2025. So what happens in that circumstance?
What I can say is that the courts don't just have this ceiling that once it's breached, it's an automatic violation of somebody's charter rights. What we have is we have to look at the reason why the ceiling was breached. So if a case takes too long, we look at why it took too long. And as Mr. Varandi said in the last panel, the court discount what exceptional circumstances or discrete exceptional events. So things like the pandemic are simply subtracted from the delay assessment. It's as if no delay occurred, where the delay that has happened because the court's been shut down are attributable to the COVID-19 pandemic. So I suppose we can assume, as you are, that everyone is going to fight their case or everyone goes to trial. I mean, we simply know that isn't the case. We know that some people will go to trial, and some of these offenses aren't the types that would clog up the criminal court system. They're what we call provincial offenses. They're the types of things like traffic tickets, parking tickets. Again, the sky isn't falling. Here, what we have is a situation where the courts have come up with some great ideas to remedy these problems in the short term, and we've offered to you some solutions in the long term, finding ways to get some of these cases that just don't need to be there out of the court system. And there's lots of other solutions to come up with, but I don't think we need to worry about simply having these fines being simply dismissed because they've taken too long to come to trial. I think the courts are going to account for the delay and the reasons behind the delay in assessing whether or not any of these cases should be thrown out or simply dismissed.
Thank you, Mr. Brown. Through you, Madam Chair, so back to Mr. Brown again. So you had mentioned about federal and provincial, and here lies the issue that I see in that our borders, our airports, our borders, international airports, that's very, very federal. And the provincial system, in the event that they get a ticket, quote unquote, is that going to land on the laps of the provincial legislation? Jurisdiction, or will that be federal jurisdiction?
Mr. Lewis, it really depends on who's initiating the offense in the first place. If it's the province that's enacting some sort of bylaw infraction, that's going to end up in the provincial system. And if it's some sort of piece of federal legislation that's being violated, that's going to be part of the essentially the criminal system, in the same way that drug offenses or other offenses are prosecuted. And so either way, I mean, it's the same judges that are likely going to deal with these problems, so we have to be prepared for it. We have to acknowledge that these issues may come through. But again, I don't think the solution is simply to, as some panelists have suggested, is just to suspend somebody's constitutional rights indefinitely to accommodate for the ability to prosecute some of these fines. I think the answer is to look at, well, what else can we do to relieve the burden off the justice system? Because we know that it's going to be a tragic situation if a victim of a crime has to wait years and years and years for a case to make their way through the justice system. Likewise, an accused person who's facing strict bail restrictions or is in custody. I mean, we can't have a situation where we just allow those cases to go on indefinitely. We have to find other solutions.
Thank you, Mr. Brown. Last question. Madam Chair, through you to Mr. Brown again. Sorry to pick on you, sir, but I'm not trying to pick on you. I really respect it. I was listening to your testimony very, very in depth. The federal government has introduced Bill C-23 to try and address some of the backlog. Do you have any other thoughts or feedback on the legislation as it was introduced?
Yeah, I'm going to pass this one off to my colleague, Mr. Struthers, and I'm sure he'll have some things to say just about the importance of Zoom trials and the ability to accommodate those trials.
Madam Chair, if I may, our Zoom trials have been actually a godsend. The system would have failed completely without them, and we've done very, very well for the past 13, 14 months now, having an awful lot of things done by Zoom. But your question about the airports and courts and the interrelationship of those two things, look, the problem in the courts isn't a series of rich scofflaws taking $3,000 tickets at the airport because they want to go home. This is not the problem. And, deflecting to suggest that the problem with COVID or the problem with the justice system is, a federal problem with the airport is frankly complete nonsense, with the greatest of respect, sir. This is not the issue. If there are 4 people in Canada that took a $3,000 ticket in the past 12 months to enter Canada and say, to heck with you, I'm not going into my quarantine, I can afford $3,000. If you can find those 4 people, I'd be amazed. This is not the issue. So with the greatest of respect, what we have now, and what Mr. Seeley-Harrington was very clear to point out, you don't lose weight just by exercising. You have to lose weight by eating less. You have to digest less, which means that what we have is an entire system that is criminalizing mental health, criminalizing poverty, criminalizing domestic problems, and criminalizing drug addiction, and expecting the criminal justice system to solve all of these social problems. It can't do that.
I'm going to stop you there, Mr. Struthers. My apologies. We're well over time.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Lewis.
And to Mr. Struthers, I will, 4 is an understatement. Thank you, Mr. Struthers. Thank you, Madam Chair.